Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
Kind of shifting back to advertising, Rand Fishkin had a really fascinating post that is not a new critique of paid fill-in-the-blank PPC media, questioning whether or not it's really delivering the value that people think it is. It's kind of a there's sort of two arguments. One is that was raised in the early days of the internet is that ads are not online advertising is not getting enough credit for the value it's actually delivering. Display in particular was always the subject of that discussion. But Rand's argument is quite the opposite, that analytics are making us think that paid ads, performance advertising, is doing more than it actually is. And he gave a bunch of examples, companies that have cut their ad spending down to zero or
right.
Near
he
zero.
Highlighted Airbnb's CEO's statement saying that they took their ads to zero during the pandemic and they basically didn't see an impact. So
right, and Procter and Gamble has done those kinds of experiments in the past, and so it's an interesting. So take it away. I don't want to steal your thunder.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So I would say that there's a caveat for me anyway that a lot of the companies that are typically used as examples of companies that can do this and not see an impact are very large brands already. And I think that there's sort of a need to get to a stage where your brand actually is sort of top of mind for consumers before this story is as effective as the one that Rand tells. But generally speaking, I think, the point is that because performance ads are so trackable that CMOs and CXOs, the C-suite, loves them because they can tell a really tight story that, okay, we spent X dollars on these ads and they brought us Y revenue. And even though Rand's point is that in most cases, people probably would have bought the thing that they were going to buy without actually clicking on that last performance ad, particularly if it's a retargeting ad. That they're sort of, he used the analogy of a marketer standing outside of a pizza parlor with a discount code and then taking credit for all the discount codes that got redeemed at the pizza parlor. So that you're just sort of you're cherry picking your customers who would have bought anyway because another channel was working better than your retargeting ads really are. So I think it's just an interesting thing to sort of keep in mind. I don't want to throw all performance advertising in this bucket. I think it still is hugely valuable to even try to build an audience and to build a customer base for smaller businesses. That said, the thing that struck me, there are a couple of things that struck me. There's been a historically there has been a huge underinvestment in SEO and other organic forms of marketing because they are not very trackable. And I think that's partly where Rand is coming from with this. Now, it should be said he probably has a little bit of bias because he now runs an influencer marketing product, which is a little bit less trackable. But I think that was one of the things that stood out to me. The other thing is, as it relates to local, is this is where the specific ad unit of a local service ad really is so brilliant, because it's very hard to imagine that you have seen an ad for Joe the Plumber or been to Joe the Plumber's website before, and then, it's actually, the last click on the LSA is what brought you to Joe. I don't think that that's a very realistic consumer journey. I think that the LSAs really are catching people who are in the, hey, I need this thing now, and this is the ad unit that is bringing me to this business. So I think it's just
and that's particularly true with Google including the LSA in the pack.
In the pack, exactly, right, where it's even a little less clear, what's paid and what's not. So I think again, it's just a really interesting article. I think it's a very timely article given all of the things that Greg you just mentioned, and something I hope people will at least sort of file away at the back of their minds as they're thinking about their marketing budgets moving forward and that sort of thing. Is I do think organic tends to get the short end of the stick, and that potentially we're spending a lot more money on ads that are preaching to the converted as opposed to actually evangelizing our products or services.
I think it's really challenging to tease all this apart. I think the point you made about brand equity or brand awareness is a really critical point, because these well-known brands that people shop for or buy from anyway are, you're getting a lot of sort of direct navigational searches to those brands. How many times have you, just out of laziness, done a search for a particular site or brand and then clicked on the ad because it was the top link, simply because it was an easy way to get to the, there's some percentage of that going on, but also people would buy from those brands anyway. Where it gets a little murkier is in your local scenario, where people don't know local brands. They don't, you want to build a fence or have somebody paint your bathroom. Unlike you, Mike, that has like a curated roster of home services companies, most people will just go and do a search and then do some review, investigation. And most of those searches are unbranded, not navigational, category based, and that's where the ads really do seem to matter. And they matter in part because the platforms like Facebook and Google have made it harder, notwithstanding the local pack, to get those organic results in the top slots. So I definitely think there's value for ads, but as you point out, David, the imprecision or the lack of trackability, if I can use that word, for organic is a challenge, because internally, when people are justifying budgets, they want to see KPIs, they want to see metrics that are mapped to ROI very, very directly.
There's even a conflict in the analytics. I mean, Google's interest is in showing last click attribution to the ad in their analytics product. And they do that a lot. So I think there's a conflict.
Rand did highlight the series from Avinash Kaushik on that sort of exact problem that GA has been historically trying to solve, trying to do a better job of. But yes, you're right. There is an inherent bias there.
But it's just interesting, because in the sort of zooming out to the larger kind of story of advertising and where advertising is now, ads are more expensive than they used to be. They're more competitive as more people are trying to market online, even than in the pre-COVID period, and you've got uncertainty about their efficacy. And it's motivating some people to try other things, to go back into traditional advertising. Out of home in particular is one that's seeing some benefit, although you can track that with mobile devices. So it's kind of part of a larger interesting story about what do we do now, where it's getting harder to track things and it's getting more expensive to buy ads, and yet we're compelled to buy ads because of competition, which is also driving prices up. And the lack of organic visibility in some of these platforms. It's kind of a perfect storm of challenges for many advertisers, especially small businesses.
I was muting myself. I do think that there's we're at a very interesting point in the sort of ad organic digital ecosystem. I think it's in some ways as interesting as the rise of Google in 2004 and 2005, where I think that there is going to be real opportunity for creativity and for trying new things that hasn't necessarily existed, because it was, initially, SEO was so easy. It just worked. You just did it. Facebook ads were so cheap. They just worked. You just did it. And I think we're in a space now where everything is a lot harder and everything is a lot more expensive, and that there's room here for, it's harder just to run the same playbook over and over and over again and see success. And so I think that should excite people who are in marketing because of sort of creative reasons as opposed to just functional reasons.
Well, I mean, that, connected TV is one area that's growing and where a lot of people are doing exploration. And then also, obviously, influencer marketing and TikTok is a sort of an extreme example of that. And one of the interesting things about influencer marketing, not to open another door, is that people are saying that the most effective influencers are not the celebrities, but they're sort of the tending toward the micro influencers, smaller people who have smaller number of followers but are perceived to be more credible, not sort of necessarily people who, Kim Kardashian and others that people have historically thought of as influencers. Okay. All right.
I think that's a very positive way to end the show.
Yes. Yes, I think your point about creativity is great, and hopefully people will do that. I mean, it opens the door for a lot of experimentation, creativity.
Yep.
Hopefully people will follow up and try things and so on and so forth. All right. So that brings us to the end of another fun-filled, fact-filled, satisfying episode of the Near Memo.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.